September, and Chris and I came up to Manchester,
Yes.
and you were part of giving a presentation there about the way in which your strategy was evolving at Corps UK in terms of doubling the size of the cooperative economy.
Yeah, absolutely. So so the meeting that Dave was invited to is we held a round table to kind of discuss in terms of how what doubling the size of the cooperative mutual sector looks like. So the one thing we really don't want, and this is, I think, crucial, if I'd love for Welsh Labour to promise to double the size of the cooperative mutual sector in Wales. That would be a wonderful ambition to have. But the one thing we don't want is for ambition like that to become a target. You don't want doubling the size to become just a target for ministers and even worse for civil servants to just hit. Because once you produce a target, you start inducing weird, perverse incentives on civil servants to do weird things to just hit their raw number. And the really important thing there is, what does doubling the size mean? So we could double the overall number of co-ops and mutuals. Now, I think that is what, if you speak to Department of Business, I think that's what they are seeing it as. But it could also be doubling the number of people who are members of a co-op, doubling the number of people who are employed by a co-op, doubling the total GDP turnover of co-ops. These are all different metrics that don't all quite require the same thing. So we like the ambition. Doubling the size is ambition, and we like ambition. But what we want is for that ambition to be focused on simply delivering an environment that allows co-ops to grow and thrive naturally on their own. So we want to remove the barriers. And so that's the important thing. We want a government that is pledged to it, pledged to doing it, and is committed to actually removing those barriers that individual co-ops face.
That's really helpful. Questions then. Who'd like to ask the first question? And if you'd unmute yourself and mute when you've finished. Well, let me use chairman's prerogative to get things moving. Tom, you actually referred to the UK New Labour government having double the sector. Wasn't this in relation just including NHS trusts in the calculation?
So there was a discussion about this. So Co-ops UK, every year we publish the Cooperative Mutual Economy Report. You find that on our website, that runs through the individual parts of the sector and how large the sector is. How it's like our census of the sector and how we're doing every year. What we've done this year is we added the NHS trusts in as mutuals for the first time. You get in a big debate about whether public service mutuals are actually mutuals. I mean, then you get into a whole debate about what a mutual is, and that's a debate that we can firmly park for another time. But the important point is we've added the NHS trusts in, so that did effectively double the size of the cooperative mutual sector overnight compared to last year's report. We then updated the comparison figures inside the new report, because obviously we don't want to give ministers the idea that the Labour Party's just come into power and magically overnight the sector's doubled, because all we've done is move some figures about. But the reason we've done that is to give a better reflection of where the sector is in terms of growth at the moment, and include all the different parts of that sector, particularly because the new Labour government, you may have heard ideas of post office being floated around for mutualisation. This was a conversation that was started towards the tail end of the last government. Started having this conversation after the Horizon scandal, when that was in the news, and we had the drama, and we had the inquiry going on. That was the idea being floated. It's kind of come back again as being something that's still being discussed, and now we hear kind of mutualize this, that, and the other floating around. It's kind of the conversation. It was floating around Labour conference. It was even floating around Tory conference in a few rooms, and it's kind of floating around government circles at the moment. Is mutualised Network Rail, mutualised Thames Water. So there's lots of this, mutualise that kind of conversations going on. So there's a piece of work to do around exploring those options, and obviously that's something extremely useful that a Welsh Labour government could do, is explore those options for mutualisation in terms of the service delivery, and how it can provide mutuality as a whole service and how it delivers its services, and that could absolutely be huge. One of the things that I'll also add on, that the powers. There's long been discussion about whether you could have a Marcora law in Wales, because it's a discussion about whether it's in the competencies of the Scottish Parliament. Um, I don't 100% know. I think you could go back and forth on the legality of it. But certainly, if it is within the competencies of the Scottish Parliament, there's certainly nothing to say it wouldn't be within the competencies of the Welsh Parliament to also do it. Because it would require levels of control over employment, and in terms of employment benefits and allowing workers to, in theoretically, opt out of redundancy payments in order to use that money to buy the company. That maybe is theoretically possible. I don't know, but maybe that is something that should be pushed for and should be explored, because that would absolutely allow you to grow work co-ops and allow people who are to save their business when it's facing the end. It would allow workers to collectively come together and buy their business. That's where a lot of the employee ownership growth in North America has been. It's been in terms of workers buying a business as it's facing hardship. That's been the point at which workers have bought it. While in the UK, much of the employee ownership growth has been in terms of owners looking to hand on to their company and keep the values of their company alive. So handing to their employees makes sense. That's why Aardman Animations is now an employee-owned business, because it wasn't facing any difficulty. It was just the owners of Aardman wanted to pass it on to their employees to keep the business going. There was no one else who was a suitable buyer. So the incentives are there, and there are additional levels of things you could do to protect it. But circling back to that sort of overall point about NHS trusts, etc., we haven't doubled the size of the cooperative sector economy, but we do want to see it be doubled, however that looks. And obviously that includes supporting building societies, employee-owned businesses, and the wider range of the mutual family. We want to see not just co-op but and mutuals and all these businesses that do things differently and put people first. We want to see those types of businesses growing under a new economy.
Thank you. If anyone listening wants to get clarification on the Marcora law issue, and I'll ask video, there was a good conversation going on between Chris Hall and Casey Gordon and Alex Bird on that very topic. And it was felt that there are aspects of the Marcora law that were out with Welsh Government competence and that it maybe needed to be called something different.